Floods, droughts, crop failures, potential societal upheaval. The threats that climate change poses are intimidating. Such a grave potential can overwhelm us, trapping us in fear, leaving us unable to act. At times like that, it's important to remember that there are solutions out there, ways to deal with this towering existential problem. Solutions, some of which may even sound familiar, like renewable energy and tree planting, along with others a bit more alien, like bog conservation and the repurposement of refrigeration materials. To address this modern-day Leviathan, we must make use of each and every solution available. For such a necessary effort, here are the 20 best solutions compiled by the researchers of Project Drawdown and paramount to keep in mind and implement as we make our way to the year 2030. Coming in at the bottom of the best is fission-based nuclear energy. While nuclear plants are initially costly, their atomically sourced energy is carbon-free and possesses the coveted quality of being able to serve as baseload power. Nuclear energy has often suffered in the court of public opinion, though it is one of the safer forms of energy in terms of death rates, and nowadays much spent radioactive fuel can be recycled given the proper infrastructure. If nuclear energy made up 12% of global electricity production by 2050, we could see an emissions reduction equivalent to about 16.1 gigatons of carbon dioxide, which, for reference, is a little under half of the entire world's yearly CO2 emissions. While this would cost an additional $900 million, it would generate the savings of up to $1.7 trillion, a clear-cut economic boon. Number 19 on the list is managed grazing. A different way of letting animals like cows graze, it attempts to mimic migratory cycles of wild herbivores to let the soil maintain its carbon content. Application can be as small as decreasing current animals per acre, or as large as adaptive multi-paddock grazing, which rapidly shifts animals between many smaller enclosures. Managed grazing generally avoids much fertilizer, chemical use, and tilling, allowing for soil vitality through natural carbon sequestration. If managed grazing grew from its current use on 195 million acres to 1.1 billion acres over 30 years, an additional 16.3 gigatons of CO2 could be sequestered. Financially, a $50.5 billion investment would grow to $735 billion by 2050. Number 18 is geothermal. Literally earth heat, geothermal energy is produced from the Earth's interior heating underground water, resulting in steam and geysers, which are then harnessed to turn turbines and generate electricity. Geothermal is obviously a geography-dependent power source, but because the Earth's heat is constant, at least on our timescales, it can serve as another baseload energy to support other renewables. If geothermal rose from its current 0.66% of global electricity generation to near 5% by 2050, we could avoid 16.6 gigatons of CO2. We would save over $1 trillion on the long run, in addition to the implementation costs also saving us around $155 billion right now. Number 17's tree intercropping is another regenerative land technique which allows soil to retain its carbon. Instead of large monoculture croplands, a variety of plants and trees are fashioned side by side, promoting healthier crops, higher yields, and more carbon-rich earth. Every climate, soil, and ecosystem will call for its own intercropping assessment, but the benefits from mimicking natural forests and biomes are virtually omnipresent. The adoption of tree intercropping over 570 million acres across the globe would generate 17.2 gigatons of carbon sequestration throughout the next 30 years. This could be achieved with a $147 billion investment, which would also allow for $22 billion in savings. Continuing with innovative farming is conservation agriculture at number 16, which seeks to once again maintain soil nutrient density and carbon storage. The conservation comes from the removal of tilling, thereby promoting water retention and diminishing soil erosion. This kind of conservation agriculture can serve as an interim point between current industrial practices and other regenerative techniques found on this list that go even further in natural practices and increase sequestration. Even as an interval system, conservation agriculture can reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 17.4 gigatons if utilized acreage is increased from 177 million to peak at 1 billion by 2035. Costing just $37.5 billion, savings could be upwards of $2 trillion. Planting trees is a common calling card of climate solutions, but the targeted creation of new forests in treeless areas to maximize carbon storage is the specified purview of number 15, afforestation. While not the only form of afforestation, timber plantations for wood harvesting are the most common. It is true that creating forests which mimic natural ones sequester the most carbon and provide the most biodiversity, but monoculture plantations can still sequester a fair amount of carbon into the soil, and they're going to have a higher demand because of the yield of timber that they can produce, which is much harder to do in a pseudo-natural forest. With over 700 million acres already being used for afforestation, establishing an additional 204 million for timber plantations could sequester over 18 gigatons of CO2 by 2050. This would cost $29 billion, but it would make the landowners a net profit of almost $400 billion. Along the lines of more permanent tree utilization would be number 14, tropical staple trees. As opposed to annual crops which release carbon every year, perennial trees and shrubs can produce staples such as bananas, avocado, and coconut, all the while continually sequestering carbon into the soil. Tropical staple trees are also more resilient to threats like drought or flooding, plus they can be utilized in a range of setups like our number 17 tree intercropping. Increasing tropical staple trees from 116 million acres to 269 million by 2050 could sequester over 20 gigatons of carbon dioxide. That's equivalent to all the CO2 the world emitted in the year 1986. Due to their yields being higher than annuals, tropical staples also save $627 billion to their cost of $120 billion. With such an apparent focus on soil, number 13, peatlands should come as no surprise. Peatlands, or bogs or mires, are made up of the decaying plant matter substance known as peat. Peat is divine when it comes to carbon storage, and whiskey making too. Making up just 3% of the Earth's land area, it stores twice the carbon of all the world's forests. Because making new peatland would take thousands of years, protecting current bogs is vital to keep their stored carbon in the ground. If we protected 67% of all current peatlands, which is 608 million acres, we would be keeping over 1,200 gigatons of carbon dioxide in the ground, and we would avoid 21.6 gigatons of emissions. Because this is a conservation measure and one removed from landowners, financials are not able to be projected. Back to trees of the mild variety for number 12, temperate forests. A quarter of the world's forests exist in the temperate zone in between the tropics and the poles. Protection, maintenance, and restoration of these forests can ensure and increase the amount of carbon they sink into the ground and themselves. Projected restoration and expansion of temperate forests to an additional 235 million acres by 2050 would sequester 22.6 gigatons of CO2. Costs and savings from such a non-commercial entity restoration are too variable to calculate. The natural progression of number 16's conservation, number 11 is regenerative agriculture, taking on many forms such as no-tilling, diverse cover crops, farm-produced fertilizer, minimal chemical use, and maximum crop rotation. Like previous entries, regenerative agriculture focuses on restoring and maintaining soil health and carbon density. Increasing from 108 million acres of current adoption to 1 billion acres by 2050 would result in lesser emissions by 23.2 gigatons. A cost of $57 billion would generate $1.93 trillion in savings. At our halfway point of number 10, we see quite a familiar solution, rooftop solar. Rooftop solar has a long history, stretching back to 1884 when the first panels were outfitted by Charles Fritz in New York City. Today, they adorn millions of homes and offer an affordable way to power many off-the-grid or hard-to-reach communities. Rooftop solar provides a democratized energy path where consumers can become their own producers. Increasing from current 0.4% to 7% of global electricity by 2050, rooftop solar PV could avoid almost 25 gigatons of CO2 emissions. Prices for solar will almost certainly continue to decrease, so a $453 billion investment will net at least $3.4 trillion in savings. Number 9 offers a more outlandish technique, Silvopasture, cows and other livestock pastured among trees. Land featuring silvopasturing sequesters more carbon than pasture land barren of trees, by 5 to even 10 times. It can also increase livestock yields and potentially decrease ruminant methane production. And it's a proven technique. To the people of the Iberian Peninsula who have practiced silvopasturing for over 4 millennia, it's hardly outlandish. If silvopasture lands grow from 351 million to just 554 million acres, they could reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 31.2 gigatons, equivalent to the entire world's CO2 emissions in 2007. Like number 10, but with much greater scale, number 8 is solar farms. Being half the dual face of renewable energy, solar energy in the form of farms will need to be scaled up greatly in any net zero future. In terms of energy output, a solar farm acts like a traditional power plant at a utility scale, providing immense power at an ever-decreasing cost. Of course, they're also minuscule in carbon emissions and completely clear of the fossil fuel particulates which kill millions of people every year. Scaling solar farms from 0.4% global electricity to 10% by 2050 would avoid 36.9 gigatons of CO2, more than we globally have ever produced in 1 year. It would also be cheaper right now by $80.6 billion and save a gargantuan sum of over $5 trillion as time goes on. Number 7 and 6 represent two sides of one issue, so they are addressed jointly. They are family planning and educating girls. Ensuring the opportunity of meaningful education and the ability to plan a family on their own terms is paramount both for the autonomy of women and girls and for curbing global emissions. Education means better earnings, lower maternal mortality, lower infant mortality, lower rates of child marriages and non-consensual marriages, and less children per mother as they gain the ability and means to choose to have their family as they see fit. It also equips women to be able to better face the impacts of climate change. Family planning can be a result of education, but it is also influenced by access to healthcare and freedom from damaging social pressures. Guaranteeing women the freedom to form their families voluntarily and how they see fit is really only just. And fortunately, it will also reduce emissions. The carbon reductions from these developments are inseparable, therefore a total reduction is calculated and then split evenly between the two. These two solutions can influence family size and global population to the degree of avoiding almost 120 gigatons of carbon dioxide, meaning almost 60 gigatons for each solution individually. Costs and savings are too variable to calculate, but it is assured that savings will be immense. Entering the top 5, we begin with tropical forests. The environmental call that I remember from my school days to save the Amazon rainforest is still just as salient in a world threatened by climate change. From their original 12% land coverage, tropical forests are down to just 5%. Even still, they sequester as much carbon dioxide each year as the entirety of the United States emits. Protection from future destruction and efforts of reforestation would massively increase sequestration potential, along with providing huge biodiversity benefits. Over 750 million acres of degraded tropical forest land could be restored. Restoration on just 435 million of those acres could sequester 61.2 gigatons of CO2 by 2050. That's near double our current global yearly emissions. Because this is such a global and ranging area, costs and savings are too variable to ascertain. Number 4 is a plant-rich diet. Our diet is one of the only climate influences that we can exert significant personal control over. From ruminant methane burps to inefficient land use for agriculture, animal protein-heavy diets in much of the world means many more emissions. It also means poorer health for many who overconsume. Maximizing plant intake is a personal way to lower emissions, and societal shifts in this direction would generate huge reductions. Keep in mind, eating more plants doesn't have to mean a complete absence of meat, just less of it, hopefully significantly less. If half of the world adopted a healthy diet with lower levels of meat, carbon dioxide savings from diet change and indirect deforestation halting would total 66.1 gigatons. The costs and savings for such a nuanced, globally diverse shift are not trackable. At number 3, we have reduced food waste, continuing to highlight the importance of food in this climate crisis. Each year, wasted food makes up 8% of total human greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon from food generation, along with the methane from food in landfills, contribute greatly to this number. With rich countries throwing away over a third of our food, there is ample room to cut back on waste. If we brought waste down by 50% by 2050, the benefits from less direct emissions and less deforestation for land use could be 70.5 gigatons of CO2 avoided. Once again, financials are too complex for calculation. Number 2 offers a brief return to energy in the form of wind turbines, an evolution of one of humanity's oldest energy harvesters, the windmill. Wind turbines are quick to put up, and the potential energy they can harness is immense. For example, a combo of just Kansas, North Dakota, and Texas has enough wind potential to generate electricity for the entirety of the US. With ever-falling prices, an extremely small land area footprint, and immense potential energy worldwide, wind turbines are a powerhouse of a solution. Onshore wind turbines cranking up from 3% of electricity generation today to 22% by 2050 would avoid a stunning 84.6 gigatons of carbon dioxide, greater than 2 years of global emissions. The costs of implementing the onshore solution are $1.2 trillion. The savings, estimated conservatively, are $7.4 trillion. Finally, at number 1, the most impactful climate solution is, unexpectedly, refrigeration. The process of keeping cool our food and our bodies relies primarily on hydrofluorocarbon, HFCs. HFCs are the successor in cooling to the CFCs and HCFCs that once imperiled our ozone layer and were subsequently banned. While HFCs do not threaten ripping a hole in our upper atmosphere, they do generate significant global warming, especially through inefficient end-of-life handling of cooling units. Ideally, HFC refrigerants are transformed into other non-warming chemicals at the end of their appliance life cycle. The single strongest action to take against warming emissions would be the safe destruction of these refrigerants. If 87% of refrigerants were contained over the next 30 years rather than be released, an equivalent of almost 90 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions would be avoided. That's nearly 3 straight years of global CO2 emissions. And that is it, the 20 best solutions to climate change. The solutions from this list, along with their carbon reductions and financials, were chosen and calculated by the many experts who comprise Project Drawdown, a book and broader initiative focused on achieving the global drawdown of carbon emissions through these solutions. I take no credit for any of this research, I am merely presenting their findings in video format. If you enjoy this video, you would surely enjoy the book, as it has 60 more current solutions, future in the works solutions, and swaths of insightful commentary to go along with it. Thank you for watching, and expect to see more videos like this one on this channel about the solutions which we need to employ as we head towards 2030.